The man who assaulted my sister walked free and became our town's hero, so I used my AI skills to deepfake his confession and destroyed his life, and now I might be the one going to prison. The local news broadcast opened with a picture of the town square, flags waving, a crowd of smiling faces. And now, the reporter's cheerful voice announced, the moment we've all been waiting for, the award for our Man of the Year. The camera panned across the stage, settling on a man who looked like he was carved from good intentions and community spirit. Marcus. He waved to the adoring crowd, his smile so bright and genuine it could power a small city. I couldn't breathe. The remote was on the coffee table, inches from my hand, but my arm felt like it was encased in concrete. I couldn't change the channel. I had to watch. He took the podium, the mayor handing him a gaudy plaque. The crowd roared. From the corner of the living room, I heard a small, sharp intake of breath. My sister Maya was curled up in the big armchair, trying to make herself as small as possible. She was staring at the television, her face completely blank, but her hands were clenched in her lap, trembling so violently the fabric of her jeans was vibrating. The contrast was a physical blow. The town's hero on the screen and his victim, my sister, a ghost in her own living room. My mind flashed back to a different room, 2 years ago. A cold, sterile interrogation room at the police station. I remembered the detective, a tired man who wouldn't meet our eyes. He'd closed his notepad and slid it across the table. Look, he'd said with a sigh. He's from a good family. A pillar of the community. She's a teenager. She's probably just confused. There's not enough evidence to move forward. Just like that, her trauma was dismissed, her truth erased. Case closed. The sound of my father's voice pulled me back to the present. He was standing in the doorway, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of weary resignation. He looked at the television, then at Maya, then at me. Turn it off, son, he said, his voice barely a whisper. We just have to let it go. I turned to look at him, and I felt something inside me shift. Something hot and hard and unforgiving. I watched Marcus on the screen, accepting the town's love, soaking it in. I looked at Maya, a prisoner in her own home, her life stolen by the man everyone was calling a saint. Let it go? No, we don't. In that moment, watching the town celebrate her tormentor, I knew I couldn't let it go. And if the system wouldn't give us justice, I would have to create it myself. That night, I went to my lab at the university. The building was empty, silent except for the low hum of the servers. This was my sanctuary, a place of logic and code, a world I could control. And tonight, I was going to use it to build a monster. I pulled up the project I'd been working on for my dissertation, a generative AI model designed for audiovisual synthesis. A deepfake program. I started feeding it. Every piece of Marcus I could find online went into the machine. His victory speech from the Man of the Year ceremony. The smarmy podcast interview he did about mentoring at-risk youth. Old news clips from his high school football days. Hours and hours of his voice, his mannerisms, his smug, confident smile. All of it became data. The AI learned his vocal cadence, the way he paused for effect, the subtle tilt of his head when he was trying to appear sincere. It was learning to be him. Then I started to write. This couldn't be a simple, I did it. That's not how men like Marcus operate. No, his confession had to be a performance. A masterpiece of narcissistic self-pity and victim-blaming. I wrote for hours, my fingers flying across the keyboard, channeling every bit of my rage into the script. I wrote about how Maya was a troubled girl. How she was acting out and looking for attention. I made him say he was just trying to help her, that she misinterpreted his kindness. I wrote the perfect, disgusting monologue of a predator trying to paint himself as a savior. I wrote the words that the detective 2 years ago had basically already said. She was just confused. Then I fed the script into the machine. The next few hours were a blur of compiling code and rendering graphics. I watched as the AI stitched it all together. A digital version of Marcus began to take shape on my screen, his face constructed from 1,000 different images. His mouth began to move, forming the words I'd written. The voice was perfect, his exact tone, his exact rhythm. He looked into the camera, my camera, his eyes filled with a fake, AI-generated remorse that was so believable it made me sick. I rendered the final file at 3 a.m. I sat back in my chair, the server fans humming in the silence, and I watched it. The finished product? A 3-minute video of Marcus, the town hero, sitting in what looked like his office confessing to everything. It was flawless. It was seamless. It was a complete and utter lie, and it was the most powerful truth I had ever created. My finger hovered over the mouse, the file ready to be uploaded into an encrypted network. I had created a ghost in the machine, and I was about to let it haunt the entire town. From a burner laptop at a 24-hour diner, smelling of stale coffee and disinfectant, I unleashed my ghost. I created a new anonymous email address. The video file, a ticking time bomb, was attached. My hands were surprisingly steady as I typed out the recipient list. I sent it to the one local journalist with a reputation for digging. I sent it to Marcus's wife. I sent it to his boss on the city council, and to every single member of the youth center's board of directors. The subject line was simple: the truth about Marcus. I hit send, closed the laptop, and walked out into the pre-dawn gray, leaving a digital crater behind me. By the time I got home, the firestorm had already begun. The video wasn't just spreading, it was detonating. It had been leaked to the town's main Facebook group, and the reaction was biblical. The same people who had been singing his praises just days before were now calling for his head. The comments were a torrent of pure, unadulterated rage and disgust. I can't believe I let my kids near him. He's a monster. Someone needs to do something. The consequences were swift, brutal, and deeply, deeply satisfying to watch. By noon, the youth center had released a statement. Marcus had been fired, effective immediately. I saw a picture a neighbor posted online of his wife, her face a mask of stone, loading suitcases into her car with their 2 small children. By 3 o'clock, someone had taken a video of a maintenance worker quietly, almost shamefully, prying the Man of the Year plaque off the wall of the town hall. His life, the perfect, beautiful life he had built on top of my sister's pain, was being dismantled piece by piece in a single afternoon. And he had no idea it was me. He had no idea the quiet, broken family he'd dismissed 2 years ago was the source of his public execution. That evening, I was sitting in the living room when the local news came on.
They led with the story.
They played a heavily blurred clip of the video, a reporter's voice full of grave importance. I glanced over at Maya. She was sitting in the same armchair, in the same spot where she'd watched him be celebrated. She was watching the screen, her expression unreadable. But then, as they showed the shot of his wife leaving, I saw it. A flicker of something in her eyes. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't relief. It was something else. It was the absence of fear. For the first time in 2 years, the ghost that had been haunting her was gone. Watching her, I felt a surge of something so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. It was vindication. It was justice. It was the beautiful, terrible, and morally questionable satisfaction of watching a man burn in a fire I had built myself. But I knew this was far from over. A fire this big always draws a crowd, and always attracts investigators. The satisfaction lasted exactly 48 hours. Then Marcus fought back. He held a press conference on the steps of the courthouse, his high-powered lawyer at his side. He was wearing a somber gray suit, his face a mask of wounded integrity. He even managed to produce tears. This video is a lie, he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. It is a sophisticated high-tech attack, designed by a coward hiding in the shadows to destroy my life, my family, and the work I do for this community. He looked directly into the news cameras, a perfect performance of a man wrongly accused. I am the victim here, he declared. And just like that, the first seeds of doubt were planted. I was watching the broadcast from my lab, and I felt a knot of ice form in my stomach. He was good. He was very good. The real trouble started later that day. I got an anonymous tip from a friend who works at the local news station. It was a forwarded internal email. A local police detective, a woman named Isabella Rossi, someone who wasn't on Maya's original case, had been looking at the video. She was sharp. Too sharp. She'd been watching it on a loop, frame by frame on a high-resolution monitor. And she found something. According to the email, Rossi had pointed out a tiny, almost invisible digital artifact, a slight blur in the reflection in Marcus's eyes when he blinked. It was a fractional error, a subpixel flaw in my AI's rendering process that I had missed. To a normal person, it was nothing. To a trained investigator, it was a crack in the foundation of my perfect lie. I could almost hear her voice as I read the email. The quote was right there, sent from Rossi to her superior. This confession is too perfect, she had written. It's exactly what we wish a predator would say. It's clean. It's concise. Real confessions are messy. We need to stop investigating Marcus and start investigating the source of this video. My blood went cold. The narrative was shifting and I was losing control of it. By the evening news, the change was obvious. The headlines, which just a day before had screamed about a predator in our midst, were now asking different questions. The Chirons had changed. Local hero's dark secret had become deepfake terrorism hit small town. They weren't talking about Maya anymore. They weren't talking about what Marcus did. They were talking about me, the anonymous, high-tech terrorist who had framed an innocent man. The satisfaction I had felt was gone, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. I hadn't just created a video, I had created a crime scene. And now a very smart detective was walking through it, looking for the one thing I couldn't afford for her to find, me. The investigation pivoted with terrifying speed. Detective Rossi wasn't just a local cop. She had connections. She brought in the state's cyber forensics unit. I watched the news report, my stomach churning, as they showed footage of a sterile lab filled with glowing monitors and serious-looking people in lab coats. They were tracing the digital DNA of my creation, peeling back the layers of encryption I had so carefully constructed. I thought I was smarter than them. I had routed the upload through a series of anonymous servers, bouncing the signal from a coffee shop in another state through a proxy in Eastern Europe before finally delivering it to that journalist. It should have been a ghost trail, untraceable, but I'd made a mistake. Late one night, from the relative safety of my university's encrypted network, I began my own shadow investigation. I started tracking their progress, watching the digital breadcrumbs they were following. And that's when I saw it. The server in Estonia, the one I used as my final firewall, had a data logging policy I hadn't accounted for. A new policy implemented just a month ago. They kept records, not of the content, but of the origin IP address, for 24 hours. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had uploaded the video 3 days ago. The logs should be gone. But what if they were faster than I thought? What if they had already requested the data? Panic set in. I went back to my lab and began the digital equivalent of burning down a house. I wiped my local drives. I scrubbed the server logs at the university. I deleted the AI model, every last line of code. I was erasing my creation, my weapon, my masterpiece of justice, trying to cover my tracks. But it felt clumsy, desperate. It was like trying to unring a bell. The evidence of my crime wasn't just on my computer anymore. It was a digital echo, bouncing around the world. And I knew with a sickening certainty that they were getting closer. The psychological toll was immense. Every siren I heard in the distance made my skin crawl. Every time my phone buzzed with an unknown number, I felt a jolt of pure adrenaline. I was living on a knife's edge, caught between the satisfaction of what I'd done and the terror of being caught. The definitive sign came on a Tuesday night. I was in my living room trying to read, but just staring at the same page over and over. A pair of headlights washed across my window. I glanced outside.
A police car?
It was cruising slowly down my residential street, impossibly slow. It paused for a fraction of a second right in front of my house before continuing on its way and disappearing around the corner. It might have been nothing. A routine patrol. But I knew it wasn't. It was a message. They were here. They knew my street. They were closing in. In that moment, the power dynamic of the past few weeks completely inverted. I was no longer the hunter, hiding in the shadows, orchestrating a man's downfall. I was the prey, and my own family was about to figure it out. In my panic to cover my digital tracks, I had become careless in the physical world. I left my laptop open on my desk, just for a minute, while I went to get a glass of water. On the screen, open in a Word document, was a draft of the Deepfake script, and when I came back into the room, my mother was standing there reading it. Her face was white as a sheet. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. "Leo, what is this?" she whispered, her hand trembling as she pointed at the screen. The lie died in my throat. I couldn't deny it. It's what he said," I stammered, my voice weak. "No," she said, her voice getting stronger, sharper. "These are your words. I can hear you in them." She stepped toward me, her expression a mixture of terror and disbelief. "What have you done?" she asked, her voice cracking. "This isn't justice, Leo. This is a crime. You committed a crime." The argument that followed was brutal. My father heard the shouting and came into the room. I tried to explain, to make them understand that the system had failed us, that I had to do something. My dad, he was torn. I could see it in his face. He understood the rage. He understood the need to protect Maya, but he was also a man who believed in rules, in order. "Son," he said, his voice heavy with a fear I'd never heard before. "If they find out you did this, they will destroy you. Our family, the one solid thing I thought I had left in the world, just fractured." My mother was sobbing, calling me reckless, accusing me of throwing my future away. My father was pacing, trying to find some middle ground that didn't exist. It was a storm of morality versus loyalty, of justice versus the law, but the worst was yet to come. Later that night, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. It was Maya. She was standing in the hallway, clutching a blanket around her shoulders, her face pale. She didn't look angry. She looked terrified. "Mom told me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She walked into my room and sat on the edge of my bed. She wouldn't look at me. "Leo, you could go to jail," she said, her voice breaking. "For me." She finally looked up and her eyes were filled with a pain that was sharper than any anger could have ever been. "I can't be the reason you ruin your life too," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He already took my life. I can't let him take yours." That was the moment I truly understood the cost of what I had done. Destroying Marcus had felt like justice. But seeing the fear in my sister's eyes, the sister I had done all this for, felt like a judgment. It was the most painful condemnation of all, and in the suffocating silence of my room, I realized that the police weren't the only ones hunting me anymore. My own conscience had just joined the chase. The knock on the door came at 6 a.m. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a hard, official-sounding bang that rattled the whole house. I knew before I even opened my eyes who it was. I walked downstairs in the pre-dawn gloom, my parents and Maya trailing behind me, their faces a mixture of fear and dread. I opened the door. Detective Rossi was standing on our porch, and she wasn't alone. Behind her were 4 uniformed officers and a woman in a suit holding a thick manila envelope. "Leo," Rossi said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "We have a warrant to search the premises. They didn't wait for an invitation. They filed into our house, a quiet, efficient invasion. The woman in the suit handed me the warrant. I watched, numb, as they began to dismantle my life. They went straight to my room, to my lab at the university. They seized everything. My personal laptop, my university workstation, my external hard drives, my phone. Every piece of my digital existence was carefully cataloged, placed in an evidence bag, and carried out of my house. The cyber forensics team had found it. The final breadcrumb. The unwiped server log from Estonia. The trail had led them right to my door. An hour later, I was sitting in the same interrogation room where my sister had been told her trauma didn't matter. This time the room felt different. Colder. Smaller. Detective Rossi sat across from me, a thick file on the table between us. She didn't play games. She just opened the folder and laid it all out. "We found the source audio files on your university server," she began, her voice a flat, clinical monotone. "We found the rendering logs. We found the deleted script drafts in your computer's cache. We found the IP address from the server in Estonia, which matches the login records from your home network. We know you made the video, Leo." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the small, airless room. "We are preparing to charge you," she continued, "with wire fraud, fabricating evidence, and defamation. These are felonies. Combined, they carry a sentence of up to 15 years in prison. 15 years. The number just hung there. I had destroyed Marcus. His career was over. His family was gone. His name was mud. I had achieved my goal. But the victory felt hollow, a bitter ash in my mouth. I had won. But I had also lost, completely. "Do you have anything to say?" Rossi asked, her gaze unwavering. I thought about Maya. I thought about the flicker of life I'd seen in her eyes. I thought about the monster who was now a pariah. And then I thought about the cold, hard reality of a prison cell. I just sat there, in the crushing silence of that interrogation room, and I said the only words I had left. I want a lawyer. But even as I said it, I knew that in the end, I had succeeded in doing the one thing I never intended. I had created a second victim in this story, myself. I spent the next 3 days in a legal black hole, meeting with a public defender who looked at me with a mixture of pity and bewilderment. We were preparing for a bail hearing, figuring out how I was going to fight a mountain of digital evidence, when my lawyer's phone rang. It was Detective Rossi. My lawyer put her on speaker, his expression grim. "We need to talk about the Marcus case," Rossi said, her voice different. Tense. Something's happened. My heart stopped. Rossi explained that a young woman had walked into the station an hour ago. Her name was Sarah. 5 years ago, when she was a senior in high school, she had been one of Marcus's at-risk youths at the community center. She had been too scared, too ashamed to report what he did to her back then. She just buried it and tried to move on. For the past week, she'd been watching the news, watching Marcus on television, crying his crocodile tears, playing the victim, and something inside her just snapped. She walked into the police station, and she wasn't empty-handed. She had brought a bag with her. Inside, carefully preserved in plastic, was the dress she had been wearing that night. A piece of evidence. She had been too terrified to turn in 5 years ago, but had never been able to bring herself to throw away. The DNA lab rushed the test. The results were conclusive. It was his. My lawyer and I just sat there in stunned silence. But it was what Rossi said next that made the hair on my arms stand up. She'd asked Sarah why now, after all these years of silence. Why come forward? And Sarah told her, "When I saw that video, even if it was fake, it was the first time I felt like I wasn't crazy. It was the first time I felt like someone else out there knew the truth about him. It gave me the courage to do this." In that moment, in that sterile lawyer's office, the entire moral calculus of what I'd done was turned on its head. My lie, my crime, my sophisticated high-tech act of vengeance had accidentally created a space for the truth to come out. It had given another of his victims the strength to speak. My deepfake hadn't been justice itself, but it had been the catalyst, the spark that lit the fuse. A lie had accomplished something that the truth on its own had failed to do for years. It had given real justice a second chance. And now, I knew they had to bring Marcus in for a very, very different kind of conversation. They didn't just invite Marcus back to the station. They arrested him. This time, there were no polite phone calls. Just a squad car pulling up to his house, the same house his wife had fled, and 2 officers walking him out in handcuffs. The performance was over. I wasn't in the interrogation room, of course, but Rossi called my lawyer afterward and gave him the play-by-play. She'd walked in and simply slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was the DNA lab report from Sarah's dress. Marcus stared at it. His high-powered lawyer, who had been so smug and confident before, just looked at it, then at Marcus, and for the first time, said nothing. There was nothing to say. There were no more lies to spin, no more narratives to construct. There was just the cold, hard, scientific truth. And that's when he broke. But he didn't just confess. He didn't break down into sobs of remorse. No, that's what the character I created would have done. The real Marcus was infinitely uglier. His narcissism, once a polished shield, just cracked wide open. And all the poison came pouring out. He started ranting. It wasn't a confession, it was an indictment. He blamed them. He blamed Sarah for being needy. He blamed Maya for being a tease. He called them ungrateful little girls who didn't appreciate the attention he was giving them. He paced the small room, a cornered animal, spitting venom, his voice raw with a rage he could no longer contain. His lawyer tried to stop him, to shut him up, but it was too late. The mask had come off, and the monster underneath was on full display for the police cameras to see. I saw a clip of it later, leaked to the evening news. It was just a few seconds, of him, his face contorted, his voice a guttural snarl, yelling about how they owed him. I watched it from my lawyer's office, the sound muted on the television screen. The confession I had so meticulously created, the one with the fake tears and the manufactured remorse, was a work of fiction. The real confession, the real man was so much more pathetic, so much more horrifying than anything I could have ever conceived. It was finally over. The truth was out. Not my truth, not the one I had built from code and anger, but the real, ugly, undeniable truth. And now, the only thing left was to figure out the price of it all. Marcus was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The courtroom was quiet when the judge read the sentence. There was no applause, no celebration, just a heavy collective sigh of relief. The town, our town, had to finally reckon with the fact that they hadn't just been fooled by a predator. They had built his throne. The healing would be slow, and the shame ran deep, but there was still the matter of my own crime. A week later, I sat in the DA's office. The charges against me, wire fraud, fabricating evidence, were still very real. The DA, a woman who looked as tired as my father, looked at me from across her desk. She said that in her 20 years as a prosecutor, she had never seen a case like this. "What you did was illegal, Leo," she said, her voice firm. "But what you did also brought a monster to justice when our own system failed." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. "It was a plea deal. They would drop the major felonies. In exchange, I would plead no contest to a lesser charge, unlawful use of a computer, no jail time, just 2 years of probation, and 500 hours of community service. I wasn't a hero who walked free. I was a criminal who had been shown mercy. I signed the paper without hesitation. Justice has a price, and this was mine to pay." The final scene of this story doesn't take place in a courtroom or a lab. It takes place a year later, in the quiet, sunlit room of a victim support center downtown. It's where I'm serving my community service hours. The room smells like coffee and hope. I'm just sorting through paperwork at a small desk in the corner. Across the room, my sister Maya is sitting with another young woman, a girl who looks just as lost and broken as Maya once did. Maya is talking, her voice not a whisper anymore, but a calm, steady sound. She's listening to the girl's story, nodding, offering a box of tissues. "I know," I hear Maya say. "I know it feels like it will never end. But it does. You can get through this." She is healing. Not just surviving, but actually healing. She is taking the ugliest thing that ever happened to her and turning it into a light for someone else. My probation officer says I'm a good man who did a bad thing. My mother says I'm a reckless hero. My father just says I'm his son. I look at my sister, truly alive for the first time in years, her spirit no longer a ghost in our house. I think about the law I broke. I think about the prison sentence I almost served. And I know, with a certainty that settles deep in my bones, I'd do it again. So that's the question I'm left with, and it's the one I want to ask all of you. I broke the law to get justice for my sister. Was it worth it? Where is the line between justice and revenge, and would you have crossed it? Let me know what you would have done in the comments below. If you believe that sometimes you have to fight for the truth, no matter the cost, hit that like button and subscribe to Reddit Unpacked. We've got more stories to tell.